What if you could have a conversation with God? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my return guest is author Neale Donald Walsch. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio. Thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio. It is the interview portion of our show where our guest comes on and helps us really learn about what's going on out there. And we have a very special return guest, one of my favorites of all time, Neale Donald Walsch. Neale's written over 40 books on contemporary spirituality and its practical applications in day-to-day life. His books have really affected me because, and we'll get into this, really Neale talks about God experiencing itself through us. And I think once you process that, it changes everything in your life. So thank you, Neale, for that. His 9 Conversation with God series have made the New York Times bestsellers list. Book 1 remaining there for 134 weeks. He's got books translated into 37 languages. He's the creator of the CWG Connect, CWGconnect.com, a global online platform that connects people who wish to more deeply explore the messages and the conversations with God body of work. You can reach him at nealedonaldwalsh.com. It's Neale with an E at the end. And he's got a new book, GodTalk, Experience of Humanity's Connections to a Higher Power, which has a 6-step process in it for making your communications with God a little bit easier. So welcome back to Guys Radio, Neale, and so happy that you're here again.
Thank you, Robert. It's lovely to be here with you. How may I serve the moment?
Maybe let's touch quickly on GodTalk, and then we'll move to our bigger conversation today because we covered a lot of that last time. You mentioned in that book, so people know, the name of the book is GodTalk, a 6-step process to help people make their connection with spirit.
Yes, and it's a really simple process: possibility, worthiness, willingness, wakefulness, acceptance, and discernment. And I can run through it in 30 seconds for you. Possibility
Please.
means that we have to acknowledge that it's possible that God would actually talk directly with us. Of course, if we're not willing to acknowledge that's even a possibility, then it can't possibly happen. Worthiness, the second step, is we have to embrace the fact that we are worthy for God to talk directly to us. It isn't that God only talks to, the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Chief Ulama or the head rabbi or somebody who's, sacred or in some different place, that God talks to everyone all the time. So we have to embrace our worthiness. Step 3 is willingness. This is not a small step because most of the world's religions, and there are 4,000 of them, most of the world's religions tell us that if we claim that God is talking directly to us, to say nothing of talking through us, we're committing blasphemy or heresy. So we have to be willing to set those teachings of the world's religions aside. And it's a courageous thing to do that. Step 4 is wakefulness. Once we step into our courage to receive conversations with God, we need to be wakeful, that is, wide awake, because the messages are going to come to us in 100 different ways across 1,000 lifetimes, in 1,000,000 moments. So we just have to notice that messages from life to life about life will come to us in so many different ways: sense, feelings, thoughts, ideas, visions, as well as direct commentaries and words. Step number 5, acceptance, Robert, means that we have to not reject what we hear and say, it's just coincidence. No, it's just a serendipity, but actually don't reject it, but accept it for exactly what it is: a tip-off, an insight from the source of divine wisdom that resides within all of us. And finally, step number 6, discernment, how to tell the difference between those kinds of messages and messages that are coming to us from 1,000 different directions these days, especially with the internet all over the place. So to be able to discern the difference and to know how to feel into what is genuinely a communication to life, about life, from life itself. So those are the 6 steps. And I go into it in great detail in the book to give people a deeper sense of how to step through that process.
Okay, great summation. The name of the book is GodTalk. I'm holding up 3 of Neale's books: the Conversation with God, book 1, book 2, book 3, just about every question you can imagine is answered by God in these books. So the first question would be, you were going through a hard time, you connected with God, you got the conversations going, you started writing them down, you contacted an agent, contacted a publisher, you got your deal, and off you went. And it's continued. So do you consider yourself, how would you describe yourself? An author, a channel? I know you're not a psychic. You channel messages though. So how would you describe yourself for our
Well,
listeners?
I wouldn't use the word channel, Robert, only because
Okay.
of the way it's popularly used. In the popular use of the words, a channel is thought to be a person who somehow steps aside or who, the spiritual entity takes over their body and their mind, and they start speaking through that person.
Mhm.
So that's not a word that I use. I've stayed away from that. I don't claim to be a channel for God. God certainly hasn't stepped into my body and is taking over my body. So I wouldn't go there. What word would I use? Messenger.
Okay.
I think, you know what? I took dictation. I simply took dictation. And I've been given the opportunity, not even a command, not even a requirement, but given the opportunity to share the messages that I was given in answer to my own personal questions. And I accepted that invitation and sent my writings to a publisher who found a market for it.
Mhm. Do you people out there are probably thinking like, how often does God speak to you? And I know you get into in the book that we can all have our conversations with God, and God is always speaking to us. We just have to find the ways to see. We have to kind of rediscover ourselves so we can kind of get in touch with God speaking with us, communicating us with us, if you will. Now, you had your experience where God came to you and kind of dictated these books to you. How else and when else does God speak to you?
Gosh, that's a huge question. As I said a minute ago, Robert, in 100 different ways across 1,000 moments. Let me give you one example.
Please.
I'm in the menswear department at a local department store a couple of years ago, and I'm picking out a sport coat for myself, and suddenly I smell gardenia, the fragrance of gardenia. So I said to the guy, "Is the perfume counter nearby?" He said, "No, it's on the bottom floor of the store." I said, "It's on a lower floor. I'm smelling gardenia right here." He said, "I don't smell that. I don't know. Maybe somebody walked through, but I don't know who it is." But I kept on smelling this gardenia for no reason at all, right? I get home and I realize as I'm driving home, gardenia was my mother's signature fragrance. It's the perfume that she wore all of her life. So I thought, you know what? I need to call my mother. So I called my mom. But and it was,
Mm.
I'm not a person who called my mother every other day. So but I did call her out of the blue. How you doing? What's going on? Tell me everything. We're having a chat. Turned out to be one of the more important conversations I ever had with my mother, and sadly, one of the last, because she left this planet not long after that. Now you tell me, what was that about? Why am I smelling fragrance in the men's department of a department store? That was my mother's signature fragrance. That's one of 100 different ways that life will communicate to us about life through the process of life itself. And I've had many of those kinds of moments where, there's no other explanation for it. One other example was I remember having an amazing thought. It doesn't matter what it was at this point. I don't remember, frankly, what it was, but I remember having an amazing insight one night walking down the street. And I thought, could that be true? I mean, could it really be like that? And I was just kind of wondering about it. And a shooting star streaked across the sky right in front of me in that exact moment. you know again, you could say coincidence, serendipity, but no, I looked at it and I went, okay, if God could yell yes louder than that, I'd like to know how she would do it. So those are just a couple of examples, and I can give you most people, when you press them, can give you examples just like that from their own life.
Let me give you one that just happened to me about 3 or 4 days ago. Every morning I meditate, and as part of the meditation, I ask Spirit, what do I need to know today? And invariably, I've been getting to the point where before I can even articulate the question mentally in my mind, I already have an answer, a very brief answer, right to the point.
Even before you ask, I will have answered, saith the Lord.
Yes. So this time I asked, and I got nothingness. I got a complete blank, devoid of feeling, devoid of anything. And then I got, you do it. And the message I took away from that was that God was reminding me that God is within me, that I am God, because if I have the slightest little sparkle of God in me, then I'm part of God. And if God experiences itself through me, then God was telling me to claim my power, not be asking in a duality sense, something external, but go inside and ask myself to bring forth who I really am.
Wow, that's a profound piece of advice, a profound input, a profound insight. And of course, it's the message of all the world's great religions. If you study Hinduism, that's precisely the message of the Hindu faith, just as use one example. So, to end dualism and to realize that what you need is right there inside of you. So, wow, yes, I hear you. That's a great insight that you received.
And that to me, at first, I was upset because I wanted the love, I wanted a message, I wanted what I'd usually been getting, and I got just a blank field. And my eyes were closed. I was deep in my meditation. I was like, I felt like it was almost a nihilistic feeling. And then I realized, no, God is telling me that go within, don't come. I'm not out here. I'm here. And so I think that's part of from reading your books, it's about life is not a school. It's about rediscovering kind of who we are, peeling away everything and discovering who we are. Is that correct, Neale?
It's about remembering what you've always known and
Okay.
simply calling it forward.
Okay.
The simplistic example I use is our multiplication tables. I'll be darned if I can tell you what 6 times 7 is. I have no idea, but not because I never learned it. I did learn it. I actually acquired mastery at multiplication when I was in the 4th grade. No problem. But
Right.
ask me the same question today, and I couldn't give you an answer because it's not. So what I've learned about God is that we've been given all that we need to know. God didn't send us down here and say, "Good luck. Hope you learn what you need to learn." No, God gave us all the information we need and caused it to be placed within each of us. It's simply a matter of calling forth, remembering, that is becoming a member once again, to re-member, to become a member once again of the body of God and of the mind of God.
I was reading, I think it was book 3 towards the end, and it said, a great affirmation is, thank you, God, for bringing success into my life. So it's getting us to the point where it's the as if we're feeling the feeling of getting what we want instead of being in a state of wanting. And so many people, as you know, Neale, struggle with manifestation, and they want things and they visualize, and it's always seems to be sometimes putting it further away from them by separating themselves from it. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, the very act of wanting something, I was told in conversations with God, will push it away from us because we are saying that we do not now have it. So when I say, for instance, I want more money in my life, God has a great sense of humor, and she said to me, Neale, I want you to know something. I have only one word in my vocabulary. There's only a single word that I ever say. That word is yes. So if you're walking around saying, I want more money, I need more money in my life, I need to get more money in my life, I'm going to say, yes, that's true. You do. But if you say, all the money I need is coming to me now, I'm going to say, yes, that's also true. So when you understand, that God only says yes, you start being very careful what it is that you are sending to God as your message about life. So I've changed my way of thinking. I love, my favorite prayer is, thank you, God, for helping me to understand that this problem has already been solved for me. And I step into the knowing that everything is going to be just fine. Everything is going to work out okay. And you know what, Robert, I'm not bragging, I'm just saying, I've learned, I'm an older guy now, I'm 80 years old. I've learned in my life that of the 10 things, any 10 things I've ever been worried about, 8 or 9 of them never even happen.
Right.
And the 10th one happens and works out just okay in the end, after all, anyway. So, and one of the things I say to my audiences when I was giving live talks before the whole epidemic and the whole thing going on now, but I would say to them, how many of you folks have ever experienced what you thought was going to be the biggest challenge or the biggest problem or the worst event that's occurred in your life, only to find out 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years later that it was one of the best things that ever happened to you? How many of you have experienced that? And every hand in the audience goes up. 98% of the people raise their hands. The master is the one who knows that ahead of time and doesn't wait for life to show it to him.
Mhm.
So I've gone to a place where I know now ahead of time. I'm not saying I don't have any problems or challenges in my life. Of course, like everybody else, I do. But when I confront those challenges and those problems, I simply know it's all going to be okay.
Mhm. Now, Neil, you mentioned, God speaks to you. When God spoke to you and speaks to you, is it the same voice? Is it a voice? How does the communication come across? Is it a knowing? It is a actual voice, like Dean Martin or something or whatever. What is it the same voice every time?
Well, as I mentioned a few moments ago, it could be a fragrance, it could be a feeling, it could be a vision, or it
Okay.
could be a voiceless voice,
Mhm.
what I call the voiceless voice, like the voice of my own thoughts. And my own thoughts don't come to me as a gentle female or as a grousy old man or as a young child. It's a voiceless voice. It's just a sense of hearing words, but I couldn't describe the voice and vocal transmission of truths, as I mentioned here, are not the only way that God
Mhm.
communicates with me.
Okay. I had another experience, kind of a conversation with God experience a few years ago. I was, and it ties into something mentioned in the book that I just read again, and that is I wasn't aware of it, but I had a tremendous appendicitis attack, and I was laying on the ground. I was in my bedroom, and I was like, this is this was incredible painful, and I started to feel my life force leaving my body, which I've never ever experienced before. And I'm like, I have to make a decision here. So I willed myself back in. And this is all in like a second or two. And then I heard a voice say, don't drink alcohol. And I haven't had a drop of alcohol since then. That was 3.5 years ago. And I worked in the business and I never had a problem with drinking or anything. But maybe cumulative over time, it was just something was not right for my body. But I heard that voice in a knowing, and I stopped, and that was it.
It's a marvelous example of what you and I are talking about here. And as I said a minute ago, Robert, I believe that most people we talk to could come up with at least one story like that, if not several experiences that they've had, whether it's a fragrance in the air or a vision they have or an idea. One more example that people will relate to. I'm driving down the road one morning, 2:30 in the morning, coming home from a party. And I've come to a stop sign. It's 2:30 in the morning. There's nobody on the road, but I stopped, of course. I obeyed the sign. You never know when there's going to be a law enforcement officer waiting for someone to go through that sign without stopping. So I stopped, of course, obediently. But then I stepped on the accelerator because there's nobody coming left or right to go through the intersection. And I suddenly hear a voice in my own mind simply saying, stop.
Mm.
I don't know where it came from. I don't know why it came, but I followed the instruction. It was an instinctive reaction. I heard the word stop shouted at me. I slammed on the brakes just then. A 16 or an 18-year-old kid comes whizzing through that intersection. He wasn't there 10 seconds earlier. He must have turned a corner around and stepped on the gas. He was going through that intersection and it had to be 60 or 70 miles an hour in a 25 mile an
Right,
hour
right, right.
zone. I wouldn't be here to talk to you about it. Where did that come from? What in the world, what was saying to me, stop? So, guys, everybody can give you examples like that when God has spoken to us. So it comes to us in 100 different ways across 1,000 moments.
Amazing. My special guest on Guys Radio, return guest Neale Donald Walsch. Here's three of his books, The Conversation with God. I strongly urge everybody to read these books. They're super helpful and they come from a place of love. I mean, we were talking about, and in your book, you mentioned that God speaks to you when he spoke to you for these books in a language that you could understand. And that's not a negative. Like he giving it to you in easy to use layman's terms. And I've talked to people who are channels and they step out of the way and they get information. And some speak in some voices and others speak in other voices. And some are more complicated and more almost conceptualized, mathematical, if you will, than others. And so my question is, sorry for the long drawn lead up to it, but when God is, if God is inside of us and God is also somebody who's speaking to us, is it like somebody who's experienced the world of time speaking to a 7-year-old, so they have to separate to communicate with us from their place of wisdom?
I think that that which I call God is absolutely aware of the consciousness level of every living thing. That's what makes it God,
Mm-hmm.
that God can do that. So God would speak to, you perhaps differently from the way that God speaks to me. And God would speak to a 7-year-old child differently than God would speak to an 80-year-old man. So because I think that which is keenly and absolutely aware of the best way to communicate with another sentient being based on their level of consciousness, their age, their knowledge, their understanding, et cetera, their experience, et cetera, et cetera. So does God talk differently to the Pope than she talks to me? I'm sure he does.
Okay.
I'm sure he does.
So what does God say about death? That we are, I know we are eternal and we change forms. God says kind of we're shapeshifters, if you will. How should we feel? For instance, my mom passed a couple of months ago, and
Well,
and I'm
there's no way we should feel. Never should on yourself, as God
okay,
said to me.
okay,
So there's no way we should feel. Each of us will feel the way we do feel based on our understanding of what death really is. Now, I've just finished writing a book called Putting Death to Death.
tell
And
us a little bit more about it.
the point of the book is to put death to death. That
Mhm.
is to put the idea of death to death, because death doesn't really exist. Not in the sense of it being the end of one's experience. Is it true that a particular physical manifestation that I'm going to call my body could, in a sense, to use a metaphor, run out of gas and get to the end of the line? Yeah, of course, that can happen and does happen routinely. But the fact that the body is no longer functioning in the physical realm does not mean that the soul has discontinued its existence. It's just you simply change it. It's just a change of address.
Mhm.
I asked God directly, what is death? I said to God, can you just explain it to me? And God has said, sure. You know, Death is simply a different point of view. It's different. It's just an opportunity for you to change your idea and change your experience. You've just changed. It's like a change of address that you get from the post office.
Mm.
But you do not fail to continue to exist. And so we exist in another realm, and then we may choose, in fact, most of us, I'm told, often do, we may choose to return to the physical realm in a different physical manifestation. That is, we choose to reincarnate.
Now, when we reincarnate, can we reincarnate? Is it always the humans reincarnate always as humans or humanoid type beings? Or in other words, we don't come back as an anteater or something, right? I mean, do people come back? They could be ETs maybe, but not necessarily. They don't kind of, I don't want to say not in a demeaning way, becoming an insect or something like that, but do people always come back as kind of this where they were, or do they even advance so there's more learning, even though it's about witnessing and experiencing, not specifically a school?
My information is, and what I was told, because again, I asked the same question,
Mhm.
and the information I received in conversations with God is that evolution only moves forward. It never moves backward. So no spiritual entity, and that's what we are. We are all spiritual beings. No spiritual being would voluntarily or is required to move backward in its evolutionary process. So therefore, we do not come back as an animal. We do not come back as an insect. We do not come back as an inanimate object. We continue to move forward. Might we come back to physicality in a different
Mhm.
civilization? where there's a far more advanced understanding of who we are and why we're here. That could absolutely happen, in my understanding.
Did God explain to you, Neale, what God, and I'm going to put the word in quotes, kind of wants, because God witnesses everything, and God is in all of us. So it's God's kind of splintered itself into everything. What is the kind of objective of what God is doing? Is it just to witness everything, to share love, to what? What is God's purpose for itself?
To create entities, sentient beings that are given God's own qualities. I think that God has chosen to recreate itself in all the sentient beings in the cosmos and to empower those sentient beings with the ability to produce their own reality using the laws of metaphysics.
Mhm.
And so God's intention is to experience divinity through each of its creations. That's my understanding. There's nothing that God wants that God doesn't, and God does not, by the way, need that to happen.
Right.
It's simply God's desire. And there's a difference, a huge difference, I was told again in the dialogue, Neale, there's a huge difference between need and desire.
Mhm.
When you come from need, it's very difficult to produce any outcome
Mhm.
that you would choose. But when you come from desire, it's a very powerful, positive, energetic that can be a magnificent metaphysical tool. So God has desires but no needs. Therefore, God does not want anything in particular, but God desires for us to experience our own divinity.
So God witnesses, God doesn't take sides from what I've read. And so, therefore, what is the purpose of prayer? And you had mentioned earlier you pray. Well, if God is just witnessing, what is there to pray for?
Whatever it is we desire.
But do we put ourselves into a position of wanting if it's like I'm praying for something I desire?
It depends on how you pray. If you pray the way I pray, thank you, God, for helping me to understand just to use a simplistic example.
Please.
Thank you, God, for helping me to understand that all the money I need is coming to me now. That's one way of praying. Another way of praying is, God, I really need some money. Help me get some money. I don't have enough money. So as I said a little earlier, it depends on how we pray. Which is simply the method by which we send our metaphysical energy into the universe. We're talking here about basic metaphysics. Do we have any kind of metaphysical power in the universe or don't we? If the answer is no, then we have a whole different discussion. But if the answer is yes, we do have the metaphysical power to create our own reality, then the question becomes, really? How? Neale, tell me how. And that's what is the main thrust of the Conversations with God dialogue books. It tells us how we can use the metaphysical power that's placed within each human being and all sentient beings in the cosmos. There's a guy named James Allen who wrote an extraordinary book, I think in 1902 or 1906, somewhere way back there, called As a Man Thinketh.
Mm-hmm.
And that book says it all. And I remember a guy walking around here about 2,000 years ago said to the leper, the leper crawled up to him on his knees and said, if I could just touch your garment, I would be healed. And Jesus turned around and looked at him and said, you really believe that? Are you just saying that to please me, or do you really believe that? And the guy said, no, I really believe it. I believe that if I could just touch your robe, I would be healed. And Jesus looked at the man and said, as you believe, so will it be done unto you.
Amazing.
And what was even more amazing is that his followers, the followers of Jesus, were astonished at what had just happened. And they were like, oh my God, they were telling everybody about it. And he stopped them. He said, whoa, wait a minute. Why are you so amazed? These things and more shall you do also. I'm quoting, by the way, directly out of scripture. I'm not making this up.
Mm-hmm.
Those are his exact words. Why are you so amazed? These things and more shall you do also.
Let me ask you about a separate subject, but equally interesting, and that is the concept of time. We talked about past lives and reincarnate, excuse me, talked about reincarnation. We didn't talk about past lives. So if somebody dies, the physical body dies, can they come back in the past if time is, we look at most people in our third dimension, look at time kind of in a linear fashion, past, present, future, and apparently time doesn't work that way. Everything's happening at the same time. What did God tell you about time?
Just what you said. There's no such thing as time in a linear fashion, that there is only the single moment of now, and that everything that ever happened is happening and ever will happen is occurring in the single moment of now. And I had a hard time wrapping my head around that. And God
Sure.
said, so God gave me an example. She said, Neil, have you ever played computer chess?
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I've played computer chess. God said, you do understand, of course, that the entire game has already been played. Every move you could possibly make has already been programmed onto the disk by chess masters. You can't make a move that the program doesn't already anticipate because it's already occurred. You're simply doing something that's already happened and you're experiencing it as it already happened. God said, let me ask you another question. Do you have any DVDs in your collection, Neil? A favorite movie you really love? I said, yes, I have. I have lots of movies I love. God said, when you hold the disc in your hand, is the entire story on the disc? I said, yes. God said, but when you put it into your machine, you're looking at it frame by frame, as if it hasn't happened yet. But the whole story is there on the disc. It's all right there. Now, and God said to me, if you guys down there on your planet can produce such outcomes with your limited understanding, what do you suppose God can do?
Another point on time. A lot of talk nowadays is about different timelines and shifting timelines and kind of splitting off where some folks are kind of quote unquote ascending towards the fifth dimension and other people have decided, I kind of want it to, I'm tripling down on the way things are. I want that to be the way it is. What does God have to say about timelines?
I didn't ask God particular questions about that. Other than, but, the information I got is that, that there is only one single moment, but we can go through that moment in any, as I mentioned, in any way that we wish. So we could call, as you play computer chess, you and I are playing the same game. We go out and buy computer chess 101. You put it in your computer, I put it in my computer. As I said, all the moves have already been made, but you choose different moves and I choose different moves. We both experience the game differently. So you call me and say, "Wow, this is really difficult. This is really I really had a hard time even winning this game." And I say to you, "Wow, I won the first time through." Huh. So it wasn't difficult for me at all. And that's the difference between chess masters and chess students,
Mhm.
or if you please, life masters and life students. So timelines, I think that a timeline is simply a metaphor that we use to describe the way we move through the single moment of now. And we can move through that moment over and over, and by the way, over and over and over again, and we do.
It's interesting that in the three books, a lot of the I'm sure people ask you, what does God say about what's going on right now? Well, reading book three, a lot of what God describes is what's happening right now already. Um, I guess is it the fact that time is, we're just experiencing a little blip in time right now, or do you get a sense from your conversations with God as to is anything happening now that things are going to go through a change, an ascension, a solar flare, this or that? I know I'm not asking you to predict the future. I know God doesn't give you predictions, but what is your sense from your conversations as to is humanity at a tipping point now in a lot of areas with all the kind of quote unquote chaos going on?
Your question is answered in Conversations with God, Book 4, which people may or may not know exists,
Okay.
but it's been out for quite a few years. It's not a new book. It's been out there for about 8 or 10 years. Conversations with God, Book 4,
Okay.
subtitle, Awaken the Species. And the question you just asked is answered fully there. It talks about what's going on in the world, not specifically, but the kinds of things that are happening. You know, the conflict, the war, the economic upheaval, the social unrest. It talks about all those things. Then it makes a startling statement. It says, you are moving through what could be the best time ever, the best moment ever in which to make the fastest, most rapid advancement as a civilization. So what I thought were the worst of times, turn out to be, could be the best of times. Who was it that wrote? It was the worst of times, it was the best of
Is that
times.
Dickens?
Yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah,
remember
I
who it
think it was
was, but
Dickens, right?
in any way,
Tale of Two Cities, right?
what the Dickens?
Yeah.
But it was the worst of times, it was the best of times. And the point that's made in Conversation with God, Book 4,
Okay.
is that this is the moment that we've been waiting for as a civilization to move forward, because all the worst things that we think could happen, the epidemic, the social unrest, the economic upheaval, all that's going on, of course, the wars, the violence, all the rest of it, are leading us to a moment when we are going to have to start making major decisions about who we are and who we choose to be, both as individuals and as a civilization, as a species.
Mhm.
So, and then God gives us a list of 16 differences between highly evolved beings and sentient beings who are walking around sleepwalking, not knowing who they are and why they're here. And God says, if you were to pay attention to these 16 differences between highly evolved beings and human beings who are walking around in an unawakened state, you could change your life. And a lot of you could have impact that could change the world virtually overnight. So Conversations with God, Book 4, is highly recommended.
I will pick it up on Amazon right after the show, and I urge everybody else to do that also. Angels. A lot of people talk about angels, and I'm sure you know that people have been told that everybody has a guardian angel that stays with them throughout at least this life. What has God communicated to you about angels? Who are they? Can they be?
Precisely what you've just said, that we each have an angel that stays with us throughout our physical incarnation. And those angels are, to use a vernacular, to use a metaphor, volunteers. That is, a soul decides, that I would like to guide and work with a physical entity to assist them in moving through their life. And a soul would do that as part of its evolutionary process.
Mhm.
So that's why a soul would do it. And sometimes it could be a parent who chooses not to let go of their uh, sense of duty and responsibility for a child that they brought through. So, if someone had said to me, Neale, has your mother ever given you advice in your lifetime, even after she passed from her own physical life? I'd say, oh yeah, I hear from mom all the time. And I hear from my dad as well. Sometimes just in remembering the things that he would say to me, but sometimes an urging where he might say to me, son, have you forgotten what I've told you? Let me repeat it to you. And then I would bring to my memory words that my father would speak to, would say to me. He said some astonishing things to me when I was 7 or 8 years old that I didn't really catch the importance of until I was like 28 or 39.
What does God say to you about the dream state? What can we glean from our dreams? Are they random, or do they have messages, and how can we work with them?
The answer is yes to both questions. They can be random and they can be messages. So it's not either one or the other. It's not either black or white. It's not either this or that. So it can, that dreams can sometimes be the random workings of the mind, and dreams can sometimes be specific messages that are being sent to us, in fact, by our guardian angels or by the source of divinity itself that resides within all of us. I pay attention to my dreams, and when I have a dream that's particularly impactful or even unusual, I keep a dream journal and I write the dream down. And often when I'm writing the dream down, I go, oh, that's what I was being invited to take a look at. Isn't that interesting? So,
Mhm.
There was a guy who made a movie a few years ago called What Dreams May Come.
I remember that. Yep.
Yeah.
Was that the Robin Williams?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
What?
A wonderful gentleman that I
Mhm.
got to meet. I went to the premiere of because I knew the director of the producer of the show was a man named Stephen Simon, who
Mhm.
also directed Conversations with God, the movie.
Mhm.
So Robert and I had a direct connection.
Yeah, fantastic. What, Neil, what have you, and my special guest, Guys Radio, the amazing Neale Donald Walsch, somebody I really respect, and I love the teachings coming from God through Neil in these books, and how it's in the layman's terms, so it's very digestible. What have you had over the 30 years since the first book was published? Any type of epiphanies, like I never thought that, or like this is new, or like an aha moment? Or do you get them all the time?
I do that whenever anyone calls me the amazing Neale Donald Walsh. I will not allow myself to be called
Okay,
that.
okay.
There's nothing amazing about me. So to prove it,
Okay, okay.
but yeah, I guess the real epiphany for me was all change is change for the better. When I heard that, it stopped me in my tracks. There were two statements in my life that stopped me cold. All change is change for the better. I'm saying to God, oh yeah, really? I can name 3 or 4 changes that occurred in my life that were not changes for the better. And then God helped me to understand how they were in fact changes for the better. I simply did not have the perception, the perspective to see it that way. The other statement that stopped me cold was there's no such thing as right and wrong. And I said to God, come on, what are you saying to me? What do you mean there's no such thing as right and wrong? And God said, Neil, if you look at history, you will see that things that your civilization called wrong 150 years ago, you call right today. And things that you called right 236 years ago, you call wrong today. That is, Neil, you guys are making it all up. But the decisions you make about what you call right and wrong tell you about you and describe and explain to you not only who you are, but who you choose to be. And my son, that's what you're doing there. All you're doing in your physical life is making a statement and putting it into action of who you choose to be. I mean, Bill put it perfectly. Bill understood exactly what the story is. He said, to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to rise up against a sea of troubles, and by opposing to end them. Ah, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. There's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come. You want to read good metaphysics, read Shakespeare.
Fantastic. A perfect place for us to move on. Thank you so much, Neale Donald Walsch. Where can people find you? NealeDonaldWalsh.com, I assume?
Yes, quite easy. Or if that's too hard to remember, they can also, if you want to stay connected to the energy of conversations with God, they can go to CWG